Chapter 5. Cora dove into the sand and felt the ball make contact with her forearms. She hopped to her feet and dashed to the net in time for Ruby to set the ball for her spike. Pulling all her reserve strength, she used her stomach and leg muscles to jump well above the net and fiercely spiked the ball through her opponent's block to hit the sand behind her. Before her feet even touched the ground, Ruby had her in an embrace as she raised both hands above her head and screamed. She slid down with her arms around Ruby as the two jumped in a circle, yelling, the crowd on their feet, cheering so loud that she could feel it inside her skull. As soon as Ruby released her, she fell back onto the sand, arms outstretched, legs bent. Her muscles felt like rubber, and she honestly didn't know if she could move. A shadow fell across her, and she opened her eyes to see Davis standing above her, hands on his hips, grinning down at her. She smiled back and held her hand up so that he could pull her to her feet. On an impulse, she threw her arms around his neck and hugged him. He brought his arms around her middle and hugged her back. "Great match," he said in her ear. She pulled back and grinned at him. "Hard fought. That team was tough." She turned toward the opposing team and shook hands with the two women. She knew them both and took a moment to speak to each before looping an arm over Ruby's shoulders. "Serious good game, friend," she said, hugging her. "Wow. I need water," Ruby said, pulling away and walking next to Cora to the sidelines. Unlike the opposing teams, Cora and Ruby did not wear bikini uniforms to play. Just as they had in the Olympic Games, they wore spandex tank tops and spandex shorts. Because of such high ratings for their televised matches, they no longer faced much opposition for their chosen uniforms. "Good game, girls," Ivan Sloan observed, handing each of them a bottle of water. He'd coached them as a team for the last 5 years and knew the two of them like his own daughters. He was taller than both of them, with a lean, athletic build. He wore a white golf shirt, red shorts, and a white linen fedora hat. Despite the heat on the beach, he had a full black beard, and with the wraparound sunglasses he often wore, could look very intimidating if he tried. He gestured at Cora. "You're bleeding." She looked down at her knee and brushed at the blood and sand matted together. She poured some water over it and tried to decide if she actually had the energy to walk over to the first aid tent. "Need me to get you a Band-Aid there, Cupcake?" Davis asked, as if knowing her internal debate. She chortled at his teasing. "No, I think it's good. I'll just walk it off." "Tough as nails you are." "Or, tough as cupcakes." She straightened and drank half the water before touching Davis's shoulder. "Davis Elliott, this is my coach, Ivan Sloan. Ivan, meet Davis." The two men shook hands and Ivan slipped off his glasses. "Been following the social media. Looks like it's taking off. Veltec clearly knows their marketing." "Veltec schmeltec," Ivan shook his head. "It's Cora. The world fell in love with Ruby and Jade. Something about their dynamic was special. I can tell something about you two is as well, Davis. I don't think it would have worked with just anyone." Cora felt her cheeks burn, and she tossed her empty water bottle into her bag before pulling out a clean towel. She wiped the sweat off her face and looked at Ivan. "Lunch?" "Yeah, go into the building. Should be laid out. Next match is at 3. Don't skimp on carbs today. I know how you like to fill up on rabbit food." He looked at his watch and picked his clipboard up off his chair. "Eat, then meet me back down here. I want to check out your knee. I watched you favor it in the last 2 jumps." Cora smiled stiffly. "I'm supposed to be smooth enough that you can't see that kind of thing." "Cute little girl. Go eat." She pulled on a pair of loose shorts over the spandex before she slipped a hand in Davis's hand as if she'd been doing it for years. "Ready to get some lunch?" "Definitely. I love rabbit food." They walked hand in hand across the sand to the tunnel that would take them to the athletes' area under the bleachers. She could see Ruby ahead of them with her fiancé, Andy. She glanced over at Davis. "What did you think of the game?" "It's different on television." "Oh? In what way?" "Tons of ways. Usually I'm sitting in the air conditioning eating some wings or something, and you're on a little screen." "Very funny." He shrugged and squeezed her hand. "I'm sure hockey's different live, too, but I don't think I gave enough credit to the sheer physical power down there on the sand court. I'm really in awe. Your legs are really, really strong." The rush of pride, followed by the big smile on her face, took her by surprise. "Thanks. That means a lot. I understand some of the workouts you're doing better now." She saw a look on his face that she often saw on her father's. "Are you mentally reorganizing my daily workout?" she asked with suspicion. He whipped his head around and looked at her with a surprised look on his face. "How? I swear, you're just like my dad. I thought that earlier in the week, but now I see it more." She laughed as they paused at the entrance to the room that organizers had turned into a dining facility so she could brush the sand off her feet and slip her shoes on. "It's interesting to me." He crossed his arms over his chest and smiled. "I'm going to take that as a high compliment." "You should. My dad is an incredible man. More, though, he really knows fitness and tailoring it for an athlete's needs. I see that same passion on your face." Once she had her shoes on, they kept walking, no longer holding hands. "Thank you for caring about my workouts the way you do." "Of course." They flashed their badges at the security guard standing at the door and entered the dining area. She slung her bag over her shoulder to free her hands while they filled one plate with fruit, bread, cheese, and hummus, and another plate with chicken wraps and hamburgers. Cora and Davis set their plates on the opposite side of the table from Andy and Ruby and paused to bless the food, before Cora picked up a fork with a hand shaking from hunger and started shoveling hummus into her mouth. When she felt like she had the ravenous side of her abated, she checked to see if the guys were paying attention. Noticing Davis and Andy engrossed in talk about the current baseball season, Cora leaned toward Ruby. "Davis seems really nice," Ruby said. "How's it going with the campaign?" She glanced over at him and spoke quietly so that he couldn't hear her. "I like him, despite my initial opinion." "Is he nice? Weird? A believer?" "Yes. We went to church last Sunday together. He totally called me out for praying at meals without waiting for him. Super nice. Kinda weird. Interesting worldview. Kind of traditional, but also very forward-thinking. I'm enjoying getting to know him." Ruby raised an eyebrow. "You realize that you grinned the whole time you spoke, right?" Slightly self-conscious, Cora sat back and forced the smile off her face. "What do you mean?" Ruby glanced toward the guys, who were very animated discussing the most recent Red Sox game. "I mean, I think you're a little smitten, Miss Anderson. I think maybe there's more than a pretense happening here." Cora frowned. "Hardly." Ruby took a sip of her water and nodded. "We'll see." An hour later, lying on the padded table while Ivan dug his knuckles into her calf and she tried not to cry out loud, she considered Ruby's words. No one knew her better than Ruby. They'd lived together, trained together, fought for their silver medal together. They were closer than most sisters. What did Ruby see in Cora's face when she talked about Davis that made her say that? Did she... Ivan dug into her hamstring and she cried out, tears streaming down her face. She raised up onto her elbows and dug her fists into her eyes, taking deep, slow breaths. Right when she felt like she might beg him to stop, she felt the muscle give under the pressure and the pain faded to the point of tolerance. Relaxing back onto the table, she focused on staying completely relaxed while her mind wandered and eventually made its way back to Davis. The flush of heat that covered her face had little to do with the pain from Ivan's fingers and more to do with the sudden realization that she truly did like Davis. Quite a lot, actually. What would that mean to this social experiment Veltec currently paid them to perform? She thought about it and thought that they'd probably love to see it turn into something real. Would Davis, though? Did she even fit into his plans for the future? How could she possibly approach him about it after the cool way she treated him the first few days? She'd have to think about how to let her feelings be known without opening the door to total humiliation and heartbreak. Ivan slapped the table to signify that he'd finished torturing her for now, and she slowly sat up, lifting her hands above her head to begin warming her shoulders up for the 3 o'clock match. While she stretched, Ivan taped her knee. Davis's mouth went dry when he saw Cora stroll across the green marble floor of the enormous lobby of the Viscoli New York hotel. She wore a simple black dress with shiny red heels and had all of that long hair piled on top of her head. A red rose sat tucked behind one ear. He snapped a picture of her coming toward him and could hardly believe that this beauty was his date for the night. Never mind about the pretense and paycheck at the end. He still found himself completely enamored of her. As she approached, he accessed the social media account Launchpad app on his V-phone and put up the picture. At what point did I get so blessed to have this beauty on my arm? #Be still my heart. The Veltec marketer had explained that the app would propagate the photo and caption to all his social media accounts, posting them and spacing the timing out by a few seconds each over the next few minutes to emulate human behavior. He slipped the phone back into the pocket of his jacket and walked toward her, smiling. "You look amazing," he said as she reached for his hand. I could say the same, Mr. Sharpdresser, she replied, looking him up and down, from the toes of his shining shoes to his black slacks, blue shirt, and black sports coat. He could see her appreciation of him, and his back straightened with pride. Not quite sweaty gym clothes, is it? Truthfully, you look amazing either way. Her shoes made her easily 5 inches taller than him. I really like the shoes, though. She shifted her body, looking at her shoes and then at him. I always hesitate. When you're a girl and 6'2", it makes shoes a hard decision. Never hesitate. He squeezed her hand and led her toward the elevator. I mean it. You look amazing. And very tall. Glancing at her out of the corner of his eye, he asked, Is that a problem for you? It's normal. She paused. You? They stopped walking, and he put a hand on the small of her back. Cora, I have nothing but appreciation for your beauty and physique. I am not afraid to stand next to a woman who is taller than me. I find you incredibly attractive. I don't mind looking up to you in the least. Her green eyes widened, and she put a hand over her heart. After a pause, she said, You are very handsome. I'm excited about dinner tonight. Me too, Cora. I've only heard about this place on the Food Channel. As they walked toward the elevator, some heads turned and a few people surreptitiously snapped photos of the couple with their smartphones. They were becoming a celebrity couple. You called me Cora. Like twice now, you called me Cora. Isn't Jade your family's nickname for you? It's not exclusively reserved for family. Heck, it's like a public name, especially since I'm teamed with Ruby. Ruby and Jade, the jewels of the volleyball court. Do you mind if I use your real name when it's just us, in private? He asked. She had trouble reading his expression. There was something there, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Well, no, I don't mind. It is my name, after all. He pushed the button for the elevator and rocked back on his heels. It's a great name. Cora was first made popular when American author James Fenimore Cooper named his tough, dark-haired heroine Cora in the novel. The Last of the Mohicans. Cora finished his sentence as the elevator arrived. Their eyes met. How did you know that? It was a childhood favorite, he explained. Yeah, she nodded. For me, too. Kind of a big one in my memory, actually. They stepped into the glass elevator that would take them straight to the top floor. The silence stretched, and she didn't feel like talking about how that novel had affected her adolescence with him just yet. So she asked, How's your room? He thought about the one-bedroom suite with the full living room, fireplace, and kitchen. In the bathroom, he'd found thick white bathrobes with the Viscoli crest on them, expensive bubble baths and oils, and a drawer full of amenities. Rather luxurious. I can't imagine what it's costing Veltec. She tilted her head in a question. Costing? Yeah, I'm in a penthouse suite. That wouldn't come even kind of cheap in this hotel. Probably pay each night what I pay in rent for a month. Cora smiled. You know, don't you, that Tony Viscoli is my uncle? His eyes widened, and the business mogul on the cover of last month's Smart Money magazine crossed his mind. Wait. He looked out of the elevator window, at the gleaming marble and shiny brass-coated luxury, then back at her. Your uncle is Tony Viscoli of Viscoli Enterprises? Yes, she frowned. Didn't you know that? No. He held up a hand, palm out. How would I have known that? Your last name is Anderson, and your mother is not Italian. She's American Indian, right? Personally, I have no objection to that description. Some would insist on Native American instead, and Mom's only half. Cora had been called a lot of names growing up. The little girls who called her Pocahontas for all of 4th grade came to mind. So, how are you related to Tony Viscoli? My mom's older sister, Robin, is his wife, my aunt. He's my uncle. His children are my first cousins. She waved a hand in the general direction of the lobby, gradually growing smaller below them. But that doesn't have much of anything to do with me, other than free hotel stays and really amazing restaurants. Well, and my dad is his attorney, and my mom worked for the V-Phone people on my marketing. The V-Phone people? Mind spinning, he pulled his phone out of his jacket pocket and held it up, logo toward her. This V-Phone? Yes, Davis. She spoke slowly, as if explaining to a child. Viscoli Electronics Technologies. Veltec. What's wrong? Nothing. Davis closed his eyes and rubbed his eyebrow. Suddenly, the movement of the elevator gave him a touch of vertigo. I just need to digest that. His mind swirled with the news. Out of nowhere, he felt even further outclassed, outmaneuvered. How did he not know this information? He'd researched her, but only on the surface. Nothing she'd ever put out publicly suggested her familial connection to the V-phones and Veltec. But he couldn't fault her for that, could he? It's not like she hid it. She appeared surprised that he hadn't known. Deciding to put it aside for now, he let out a deep breath, then opened his eyes and smiled. Ready to eat? With a stoic expression, she raised an eyebrow and dryly asked, "All digested?" "Yes, sorry." He cleared his suddenly dry throat. "It just took me by surprise. I'm sorry." "No reason for sorry. That kind of reaction is why I typically don't talk about Uncle Tony." His cheeks fused with heat, and he held out his hand. "Well, then I really am sorry. I hate being typical." They stopped at the top floor and stepped out into the restaurant lobby. Holding hands, they walked to the maitre d' stand. The gentleman in the tuxedo looked up from his book on his stand, and his eyes slightly widened. "Mr. Elliot, Miss Anderson, what a pleasure. Please follow me. I have your table ready." Davis felt a little glow of warmth at the thought of being recognized without having to speak. He put a hand on Cora's lower back as they worked through the restaurant and stopped at a table for two next to the windows. Amidst the rich, panoramic view, he could see the lights of the Empire State Building against the night sky. The maitre d' pulled out both of their chairs and dressed their flatware for them. "Thank you," he said to the maitre d' as he sat down. He glanced at the menu, then looked over to see Cora intently reading it. A smile crossed his face when it occurred to him that she was very publicly his date, whether he was outclassed or not. She looked at him over the menu, and a puzzled look crossed her face. "You're smiling. What is it? Why are you smiling?" Without hesitation, he replied with total honesty, "Because you're beautiful, charming, and quite wonderful, and I get to be the one to sit across from you tonight." He watched color flood her cheeks and was genuinely happy that his words affected her like that. She set her menu down and took a drink of water. "Thank you," she said softly, looking at him with her striking green eyes. "Davis, I wish we could go back to the beginning and start off on a better foot." "Can't go back," he said, looking her in the eyes, "but we can continue forward." "Forward, then," she said, picking her menu back up. She set it down quickly. "I forgot to take a picture, silly." She pulled her phone out of her bag and pushed away from the table, walking around to his side. He stood too. "Let's get the view behind us," he said, holding an arm out. As she scooted against him, he pulled her closer and for a moment just relished the feel of her body against his. She held her phone up with the camera on. Before he could turn his head toward her, she surprised him by pressing her lips to his cheek. He could see the happy look on his face reflected in the camera and the happy, playful expression on hers. As she pulled her head back, he kept his arm around her waist and looked at her. "I could get used to that," he said softly. She stepped away as she said, "Maybe you should." Those words made his breath catch. Did she mean... What if she only meant the campaign? He'd best not get his hopes up. After typing on her screen, she showed him the picture and caption. "Did someone turn up the heat? Hashtag Team USA. Hashtag Hockey for the Gold. Hashtag NYC. Hashtag Date Night." He held her chair out for her to sit down and sat back across from her. Alluding to heat is supposed to be toning down the hottie? Despite trying to be serious, he laughed. "Have you forgotten that I play hockey? On ice? Hot doesn't really translate to hockey." Her green eyes sparkled with mirth. "You've just given me ideas for a dozen different captions. Thanks for that." "Yeah, no problem. Don't mention it." He looked at the menu and picked out a cut of steak as the waiter approached. "Good evening. My name is Don, and I'll be your..." He looked at Cora and his eyes widened. Then he quickly looked at Davis, and his smile turned to a look of astonishment. "Wow! Jade and Davis, the golden couple! I am truly honored to be serving you tonight." "We're excited to be here." Cora set her menu down and said, "Tell me, Don, what is your favorite thing on this menu?" He made a very slight bow. "Honestly, no one does a steak like the Viscoli, New York. Seriously, we start with an entire side of top-choice grade A prime beef, aged in ideal conditions for no less than 21 days. Every single cut is made by hand in our own kitchen and then seasoned and cooked to unquestionable perfection according to your specifications." "Sold," Davis said with a smile. "I'll take a ribeye cooked medium, grilled vegetables, and the tomato bisque." Cora nodded. I'll take the same, but with salad instead of soup. Caesar, and tea to drink, no sweetener. Got it. Let me know if you need anything at all. I'm happy to take your picture or have Chef Marcus prepare a special treat for the camera. I know you two like to do things like that. He picked up their menus. I'll bring today's amuse-bouche between courses. He cleared his throat. Really? Honored. I made all sorts here, but you're the cream. Davis smiled. Thanks. Don hesitated, then walked away. Davis looked at Cora. Have your followers picked up since we started this romance? Or leveled out? She pursed her lips. Seriously picked up. I guess romance does more than beach volleyball. She leaned forward. And I had a lot of followers before, like over 2 million. In the last week and a half, we're talking close to another 1 million. I'm not close to 1 million yet, but it's in the hundreds of thousands. I can't even check my messages anymore. He thought about the tabloid cover he saw in the airport bookstore. He'd never imagined that one day his face would grace the cover of a national tabloid. Yeah, that's a bummer. My friends and family just text me instead of messaging. There's no way around it. The good thing is that I took your advice and haven't followed anyone new, so I'm able to at least still read my feed without it overwhelming me. Smart. She sat back as her salad was placed in front of her. Dawn offered fresh ground pepper, and she declined. As Davis picked up his soup spoon and looked at the tomato bisque in front of him, Cora held out her hand. I would love it if you would bless this food, she said, as she often did before a meal. He easily took her hand and bowed his head. Something felt different about her, and he wondered about it. Father, we thank you again for this time to know each other and share a meal together. Bless this food and the hands that made it. Let it nourish us as we go forward to serve you. Davis caught a movement out of the corner of his eye and caught sight of a teenager at the next table to them taking a picture of them praying. He didn't mind. Hopefully, that kind of picture posted online would go well toward securing Cora's and his reputation. Cora picked up her fork and knife. What day do you leave? Day after tomorrow. I'm looking forward to getting back on the ice, to be honest. They were silent for a few minutes, eating. Cora finally spoke. I feel like we haven't had enough time. He set his spoon down and stared at her, trying to analyze what she said. This is just a season. She cleared her throat, then smiled brightly. At least we have technology to keep in touch. His heart rate accelerated as he stared at her beautiful face. I'll make sure you always know how to find me.